Welcome to this week's Gaming the Podcast. I'm John Robertson, joined by Stace, Harman, and this week we're actually going to be talking about a variety of games, and it's the games that have caught our eye most throughout August. This is going to be something that we do at the end of each month or after each month is finished, depending on how the dates fall. So yeah, a little bit more of an informal chat. So Stace, I mean, the obvious question, what games have you been playing in August?
None. I don't play video games. What are you talking about? I've been playing a bunch of games, as you'd expect, and there are some just mainstays that are always on my list. For people that have listened to this podcast before, they'll know that Hades is a big mainstay. I mean, as it is for a lot of people. It's not like I'm being particularly unique or different in that selection. But also Slay the Spire and West of Loathing were also games that I played quite a lot of, along with Humankind and Psychonauts 2 that we've previously talked about, both of those games on this podcast throughout August. So the games that I want to talk most about today are Operation Tango, which I played courtesy of it being a PlayStation Plus game, which is a two-player only game for those people that don't know, and also That Dragon Cancer, which is from a good long while ago, about 5 years old now, I think that game is. And they're two games that caught my imagination for different reasons, and that I think it'd be interesting to dig into. And John, you've also got a couple of games, right, to talk about. Do you have like an honourable mentions list? Did that happen for you as well?
I mean, I've been playing Valheim every week not since launch, but since a few weeks after it came out. Well, not launch, but early access. But in Valheim, me and the group I play with have finished all of the bosses that are in the game now. We've explored all of the biomes. We've got pretty much everything there is to do in the game. There is an update coming out on the 16th, I think, of September, mid-September. So we'll probably dive back into that then. But yeah, haven't played that for a week or so since we finished it. Getting back into the Yakuza game, so I'm going through them. So I'm still at Yakuza Kiwami, which is remake of Yakuza 1 or remaster of Yakuza 1. Been playing a few shooters. Rainbow Six Siege, I've started playing again. The Back for Blood beta played earlier in the month. I
was away for that. I wanted to dig into that, but I was away, so I'll have to get it at launch, I guess, which is not too long ago. Long away, I should say. Long ago.
So, but yes, Baldur's Gate 3, I think, is probably the game I've played the most in August, and I'm currently the most interested in, got the most to say about, and as of this past weekend, been playing the Call of Duty Vanguard alpha, which obviously the game is an alpha, so it's not a full game, and the alpha's stopped now. It's a pretty small alpha, but yeah, it's interesting. There's some interesting stuff to say about it. Obviously, that's not one of the games I played the most because it was only on for a couple of days, but yeah, it's interesting. I like a bit of Call of Duty.
As a long-term, you as a long-term Call of Duty franchise player, and me as somebody who somehow has avoided or just not engaged with that series really at all, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on what's new, because I feel like that's the closest I get to being like, oh, what's in the new FIFA this year? Like, I just have no idea really about Call of Duty. It's just not in my wheelhouse, either in interest or in ability. We've talked about my first-person shooter ability, competitive first-person shooter ability, especially previously on this podcast with regard to Apex Legends. I'm sure we'll get into that again here. But yeah, so I'm interested in hearing about what's new in Call of Duty. So for a game that I have played, though, more of, and that I know you've played too, let's start the conversation perhaps at Operation Tango, which is a two-player only game. As I mentioned, I played it courtesy of it being a PlayStation Plus game. It's also on basically every other platform. And the thing I think that I found most interesting about Operation Tango is its entire kind of form and function of it being very specifically a two-player only game. And I'm finding that I'm increasingly interested in different ways to play games or different experiences that are kind of built as a very specific thing or a specific expression of an idea. And so Operation Tango, I would say, it's not the most amazingly executed game, but there was a lot of interest.
What sort of game? Well, how would you describe the game, though? Like, what, for people who haven't played it, like, what sort of game is it?
So
or like, what genre is it? What do you have to do?
It's a 2-player asymmetrical game where it's a cooperative game. You're both playing either an agent, like a field agent, or a hacker, and you both take up one of those roles, and you have to communicate over voice chat because you both see different things. That's where the asymmetrical part of it comes in. Your roles are different, but also what you actually experience during the game is different. And so it's in the vein, for me, one of the things it's in the vein of, and it reminds me most of, is the bomb game whose name is now escaping me.
Keep talking,
and nobody explodes. That's the one. Keep talking and everybody dies is what it tends to be in our house. But yeah, it reminds me of that. Like, you're both seeing different things, you're interacting with the game in a different way, and communication is a huge part of it. And that's been, and you can chop and change, you can play each level, you can switch roles if you want to, but the way that I played through it entirely as the hacker, and my partner was the agent, and I will probably go back through it again with the roles reversed.
Yeah, so I've only played as the agent. So on the train at the start, I think it's the second level, maybe, the train. Yeah, I was the one going through the train and having to look for the people that the descriptions matched.
And the hacker gets, like, the information is basically hacking into people's like profiles, digital profiles, and reading out that information to the agent, who's then trying to identify a particular person on the train. And I think the thing that I most liked about it was the way in which I played it, and the way in which it needs to be played, which is that communication. It encourages or demands, really, communication between the two parties. And it's communication because you're both seeing a different thing. You have to really listen to each other. It isn't you're in a party and you're all seeing the same thing, a la, I guess, like Back for Blood or something to that effect, Baldur's Gate, where you're seeing the same thing on the screen and it's like, okay, this is how we're going to tackle these things. It's more, okay, this is what I see. It reminds me a bit of the old, just to age myself, the old kids' TV program Nightmare, where it's like you have to tell somebody, this is what I can see, this is what you need to do, and then you feed back to one another. And it's so as well as the form, what is refreshing about it for me is the way in which the developer and publisher, Clever Plays, has gone about it. And they've released it as a game that only one person needs to own. So yes, it was a PlayStation Plus game, which obviously makes it easy for lots of people to have access to it. But on other platforms as well, it's a game that you don't need. And I find things fall down at this point sometimes, that you might be really interested in a game. It looks cool. You want to play it multiplayer, co-op with somebody. And then you have to convince them and almost pitch it to them and be like, oh, check this game out. It looks really cool, because they need to buy it. And that requires, obviously, buy-in from a financial perspective, but also if it's a thing they haven't heard of or they're not specifically interested in, there's a certain amount of groundwork that has to be done to make that a thing that you can do together. Operation Tango is just, I've got this game, let me stick it on and we can just both jump into it and you can experience it as well. And you can play with random people as well if you want to.
Never tried that. I don't know how attractive that sounds.
It's not.
You might get
me,
lucky.
Honestly. Yeah. Well, yeah. But yeah, for me, it's very much you do it with somebody that you know, and it works really well that way. And I think it's just quite refreshing that that's been the approach.
Yeah, I mean, it takes two.
It's accessible,
as well. It takes two. You only have to buy one copy, and then two people can play. Which is good because that game was launched at £35, I think, or £40 on PlayStation Digital.
Yeah,
PSN.
I think Tango's only sort of 12 or 15 quid or something if you have to buy it. So yeah, so removing those barriers, because there's particularly for people that aren't wholly invested in video games, there's enough barriers to entry as it is. So being able to get somebody involved just by saying, let me put this game on and invite you to it, is you haven't got to download anything, you haven't got to clear space on your hard drive, which is the perennial pain in the backside that we all experience. You can just you can just jump in. So yeah, that's been one of the more sort of refreshing titles that I've played throughout August. As I say, I don't think it's the best design game. I think there's some stuff that could have enhanced it. And if they do, potentially if there is DLC or there's different sort of mission packs, there's some stuff I'd like to see with like increasing the interaction between the two players. But yeah, it was an enjoyable experience, probably more so than it was a good game, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I wish the game was longer, because I think we finished it in a day, or not a day, even an evening. I remember some of the levels being a bit inconsistent as well. There's one where you have to go through, as the agent, you're going through like what looks like a small like town scene, like a carnival or something, and I thought that level was just not. That was my least favourite level. There was a lot of just, I don't know, just doing the same thing, avoiding the sight of the vision cone of people.
Oh, yes, I know which one you mean.
I don't know. It just felt a bit sort of haphazard and less precise than the other puzzles.
I know which one you mean. It's like, almost like a proof of concept. It's like, yeah, this works. But it needed to be, or would have benefited from being fleshed out and made something more. But hopefully, the game was successful enough for them that it's a thing they want to pursue and that they could do more of, because just those things that encourage you to play in a different way is, like getting into a new genre of film or a new style of directing or filmmaking. It's like I'm interested to seek those things out and give them a try. So Operation Tango, and I'd recommend it for sure. It's not, again, it's not a game of the year contender, but it's a good, potentially only one evening, but potentially, I think we played it over a couple of evenings. And then you've got the option of switching roles and going back through it as the other person, which again, I'm interested in doing because that again changes the experience from you now have foreknowledge of what the other person is seeing because you've been that role, and how that changes the dynamic, how that changes the communication between the two parties. And I remember that when I was doing that, I found that X was useful. Like it just kind of, I don't know, enlivens the conversation more than just, kind of sitting in silence, going and get that power up and, I'll take on this boss and you do that. So yeah, it's different ways to communicate. So I wonder then, does it make sense to jump in, because talking about that kind of multiplayer and communication sort of focused approach, it feels like that segues quite neatly into either of your games, actually, either Baldur's Gate or Call of Duty. So have you got which one do you think is the most?
Let's start with Baldur's Gate 3, because there's... I've played it much more, and there's much more to talk about with it. The Vanguard beta alpha was so small. It's kind of limited impressions of it, I guess, and limited hours on it. But yeah, Baldur's Gate. So I've had it.
So what's your sort of history? Like, is this the first time you've played a game like this? Do you remember the original Baldur's Gates? Like, where are you coming at this from? Well, I know you play D&D, obviously, but where are you coming at this from?
Yeah, it's certainly not the first time I've played a game like this. Whether it's Divinity or Pillars of Eternity. Yeah, I've played plenty of games like this. The original Baldur's Gates 1 and 2. No, I've played Baldur's Gate 2. Well, I had both of them as a kid, but I just don't think I had the patience for it, and I just couldn't be bothered. I think it's as a kid. I think I started them about 10 times, and got about 2 hours in maybe each time. So I probably got about 20 hours game time on them, but I haven't got past the first, like the little in Baldur's Gate 2, like the little castle and courtyard place that you're starting.
There are games that came with like an instruction book that looked a bit like a RPG source book. They're like 100+ pages, and there's an expectation that you're going to read it, or that you're going to at least be familiar with it. So I can imagine that it's not for everybody for sure.
Yeah, but it's super familiar because it has. Well, not only am I familiar with D&D from playing D&D tabletop game, but it's so similar in a lot of ways to Divinity: Original Sin 2. So similar. I mean, the combat is really where it deviates. But again, there's a lot of similarities because Divinity is kind of based on D&D in a way, but the way the action points work and stuff, like In Baldur's Gate you have bonus actions. In Divinity you have action points, and they do work in a different way, but they're kind of similar. The idea is you're limited in what you can do in each turn.
Yeah.
And then there's dice rolls in Baldur's Gate, which again are more explicit than what's happening in Divinity, but Divinity does have a similar sort of thing going on depending on how you've built your characters. It just happens in the background. You don't see the dice rolls. So it's not wildly different. There's just like a lot of sort of aesthetic considerations and stuff in Baldur's Gate that do bring it more towards D&D, which is fun. It is really fun. I mean, as someone that plays D&D, it's unfair, I suppose, is the way to put it, to compare. And I think some of the things that I've read from people who have played a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 as well, early access. And I should point out, I've had it since it first came out, day one, early access, which was like late last year. Like third quarter or maybe start of the fourth quarter last year. I can't remember, September, October it came out. Maybe even earlier than that, actually. Anyway, it's been out since last year. But there's been a significant patch 5, which came out recently, and been playing it through since then, and it is a lot better. Like, it looks better.
Right.
There's a lot more dice rolls added, which is neat. Like, it's just a lot cleaner. It's a lot crisper. There's still a lot of stuff missing. But
how's the role playing element? Like, do you get? Maybe this is what you're going to go on to talk about, but I'm wondering about the role playing versus. I mean, even versus sounds like the wrong language, but versus something like sitting down to play D&D around a table. With some friends.
And this is, it's kind of what I was going to say. So comparing it to D&D, straight D&D, is unfair. Of course people are going to, because Baldur's Gate is official D&D. Baldur's Gate is a place in Faerun, a D&D world. And there's all the D&D classes and spells and terminology and jargon and stuff in it. And I have read some articles of people saying that Baldur's Gate 3 isn't very good because it doesn't feel like D&D tabletop game. But I mean, how was it ever going to, really? Yeah. Like, depending, and also what does a D&D tabletop game feel like? Like, that's like, depending on what DM you've got and what players you're with, that's wildly different. So trying to distill everyone's personal D&D experiences into a single product that works for everyone. It's like, this reminds me of the tabletop. That's just not going to work.
It also sounds like it's setting it up to fail at something that it wasn't even trying to do in the first place, which isn't very fair either. No. So it wasn't trying to be D&D. It wasn't trying to replace your D&D experience.
It's just a D&D
based on those rules.
Yeah, it's a thing that's based on D&D rules and set in a D&D world and uses D&D spells and characters and character classes. It's much more rigid than D&D, as you would expect. How could it possibly not be? Like, how can you program it in such a way so that you just do whatever you want? So, like, minor illusion, for example, in D&D tabletop game can be any old, like, whatever you want, almost, depending on how sort of loose your dungeon master is. But in this, it's just a distraction. So it just like distracts. In combat, it will like distract people, or if you want to distract people because you want their line of sight to turn because you want to try and lock this box that you're not supposed to lock pick, then you can use it like that. Yeah. So
it's a mechanical interpretation, but a useful mechanical interpretation.
It's useful. It's just game, very single,
just not as expressive
minded in how you use it. But it's fine. Like, and it's fun. You just got to say, like, I'm in a video game now. And someone who loves Divinity, I'm really seeing Baldur's Gate 3 is more Divinity than I am more D&D. So all of these things don't really matter. I think the combat in Divinity is actually probably better currently than the combat in Baldur's Gate 3. The action and the bonus action system doesn't work that well compared to the action point system in Divinity. It feels like you're very limited in Baldur's Gate in what you can do in a single turn compared to what you can do in Divinity, especially as you start leveling up.
It has the action and bonus action almost implicitly, because it's like this thing only costs 1 action point, whereas this one costs 3, and it's like, if I've got anything left at the end of my turn, do I carry that over, or do I just use it on this? And that's effectively your bonus action, isn't it? Kind of like it's,
and that's where I think Divinity's combat feels more It's more tactical in that you can choose to carry things over. Whereas in Baldur's Gate, you can't. You've got your action, you've got your bonus action. If you've got a special item or whatever, you might have 2 bonus actions or whatever, I don't know. But it's not to say I don't like the combat, because I do, and in Baldur's Gate, I do. And I play it with other people as well. So I have played it just by myself, and I go around with my party of 4, all controlled by me. But I prefer to play it as I play Divinity, with each person as a single character. Yeah. And then you like really get into your character more, not like role playing wise, but just like in combat. It's like, right, I'm going to do this. Like, everyone wait until I position myself. And other people, you just like know your roles after a while. Like, like in a football team or whatever, you don't need to tell the striker that he's going up to top. Well, of course he is. And that kind of happens here. So it's nice to see over time the practice that you've had in battles generates you don't need to constantly talk. Like, you just know where other people are going to be at a certain time. You know kind of what they're thinking. One
of those like where you evolve and level up as a player, and it's not just necessarily you get better at this combination of buttons. It's that your understanding of what you can do with what you have available is what levels up and evolves. Obviously your character levels up, but you evolve as a player. And so the more you play with the same people, I imagine as well, the more you become that tightly knit team.
And you know what works for each other. You know what people's sort of quirks are, like, for good and bad. Like, so one character, I won't name names, or one player, as a cleric, I will always use Shield of Faith on them to buff up their armor class, because they're just going to die otherwise, because they're just like, I don't know why you're doing that every round, but
is it chicken and egg, do you think? Like, are they oblivious to that fact and they just play the way they play and you're there kind of silently protecting them, or do they do that because they know they can rely on the fact that you're going to do that for them, and then that frees them up to Leroy Jenkins into battle,
maybe I should just stop doing it. But I don't know. Like, Larian haven't said when the game is coming out, other than beyond it would come out at some point in 2022, the full thing. I imagine, given the scale of the game, that it will probably not be out before second half of next year. I reckon summer or so. I don't think it's going to be like January or February. Which is a shame, because we've kind of played it all now. We're just mopping up last little bits.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you. Are you basically now just ready for it to come out? Or do you have the appetite to go back through it with multiple different characters and all of that stuff? Like,
I'm not going through Act 1 loads of times. No, Act 1 is what you can get in the early access. I'm not going back through that loads and loads of times. I've played
do you know if that carries over? Do you know? Does the progress carry over?
I doubt it does, because I don't think all the character classes are even in the game. And there's balancing changes and stuff that are happening all the time. So I don't think they'll be able to keep the old balancing into the new patch updates or new final release. So no, and I guess that's a good thing in a way, that it's not coming out immediately, because I don't know if it was coming out next week and we've just finished Act 1 now, and it's like, right, now go and play for Act 1 again. It's like, like a break would probably be a good thing.
I wonder if they'll deliberately take it, make it unavailable in order to build up to launch. It would sound like it would make sense to do that, because you don't want people playing through Act 1 and feeling like they've accomplished something, and then it's like, the game comes out next week, and by the way, you've got to start again. Can't be bothered.
But it's good.
Yeah. And is it a multiplayer? I mean, obviously it's a multiplayer game. Is it, for you personally, is it a multiplayer only? Like, is it a thing that you have any interest,
I think,
in going through single player? You mentioned you played it single player, but is that of any interest to you?
I mean, I don't know. I would, but I would play it single player, but I prefer not to, given that what I've played now, and given that I've played Divinity twice. I'm about to start a third time as well, because the people that I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3 with haven't played Divinity. So I was like, okay, we finished Baldur's Gate 3 now, so let's go back and play Divinity. And now I'm just at a point where I'm just going to be involved in combat, really, because I know the outcomes of most of the decisions. I'm still expecting in Divinity 2, third playthrough, that there will be things I've never seen before, because the game's just so dense. But the big overarching storylines, I know what they are. So I'm just going to stay out of those, the narrative decision making.
Well, you'll maybe have to talk to us about that experience, because I think that might be like a veteran Divinity player basically shepherding 3 complete noobs through it.
Well, they make all the wrong conversation options, start loads of battles, and I just have to save him in the battle every time. It's a lot of reloading. But yeah, I mean, there's so much to say about Baldur's Gate. I mean, even in that one, but yeah, I don't know. Like Larian, I don't know. They just don't. I mean, Divinity Original Sin 1 was good as well. I've never actually finished that because I went back and played that after Divinity 2. Mm-hmm. But it's also very good. And then, yeah, Divinity 2 and Baldur's Gate 3, like their worlds are just so incredibly deep. Like just, even in this Act 1 early access, just like the secret stuff, the random stuff, or the stuff that feels random, and like the different conversation options. There's like whole character that are companions that I didn't even know you could get. Like I killed one of them. Didn't know that was didn't even know it was possible that they could join you.
It looks like a content creator's dream from the amount I've seen on either Twitch or YouTube, like just the amount of different things, like we're exploring this storyline, or this is what happens if you choose these dialogue options with this person. Like there's just so much variation, I suppose, and so many different ways that you can play it, that's awesome. And
it's incredible.
Dig into it a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I could jabber on about that for another 2 hours, but so yeah, Vanguard is my other game, which I've just finished playing, and then That Dragon Cancer is yours. So what do we want to end on? Call of Duty or That Dragon Cancer? Yeah,
I mean, I would say. Well, let me take it.
Probably makes sense to go Call of Duty as the last thing, right?
Yeah,
like
I think so.
It's much smaller amount of content, and
yeah. Well, I mean okay. So That Dragon Cancer is a game that I bought via the Humble Bundle several years ago, probably either when it came out or very soon after it came out, and it was released in 2016. And I've had it for a long time, and there's a couple of just sort of quick anecdotes about this game that I found really interesting. So I bought it what would have been several months after the birth of my first child, and I, through having a child, met a couple of dads, as just is what happens, and doing NCT, which is like parent classes for people who have never had a kid. And I met them, and we went to the pub post, like wetting the baby's head kind of thing. And we were talking, and I mentioned That Dragon Cancer, and I said, this is what it's about, which for those who don't know, it's inspired by real events. That's not even really the right way of putting it, but it's a family's interpretation of their experience with one of their children who was born and developed cancer at a very early age and died age 5. And it was released on what would have been his 7th birthday in 2016. So it's a very raw, it's the kind of thing that I approach with a certain amount of trepidation, because I now have 2 young children. And when I mentioned that this is what this thing was to these 2 other dads, one of them said very pointedly, like, why would you want to play that? Why would you want to experience that?
Yeah, a friend said something similar to me. He's not a father, but when he just phoned me up and he was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm playing this game," and I explained it to him. And he did, well, one, he didn't know that games could be that, and 2,
exactly.
It's like, why are you doing that?
Yeah, and both of those things are exactly that. It's that there is a whole world of games that we take for granted as people that are immersed in it regularly, that people on the outside for whom video games are FIFA and Call of Duty, as in that's what they believe video games are, and that's
Fortnite,
the entirety of what they are, and Fortnite, are incredibly surprised when you say, yeah, there's these games that tackle these subjects, or there's this game I played the other day that made me laugh or made me cry or was just I can't stop thinking about. That's news to a lot of people, and that's inevitable, but it's also a bit of a shame that there isn't the mainstream exposure to make everybody aware, at least, that games can be this. And it's the same with tabletop games, with board games as well. I think there's lots of people that think of those as being Monopoly and Cluedo, and that's basically it.
Well, the friend I referred to, he said, so like, what's the end of level boss look like? And I was like, well, there isn't one, really.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that's interesting, because that means that kind of that language of video games has seeped into the mainstream, and that they can, boss levels and boss fights, and you hit the boss 3 times on the glowing weak spot. Some of this language has definitely seeped through to mainstream understanding and culture, particularly with certain films and things. But yes, there was definitely that thing of like, I didn't know a game could do that. And then also, why would you want to experience that? And this was very specifically as a new father to a new father. Why would you want to experience that and play that? Now, as it turned out, at the time, it seems I didn't really want to, subconsciously, because I didn't. It's only very recently that I played it. I played it in August for the first time, 2021. And so, yeah, but as to why I would want to, I mean, I kind of very glibly sort of shot back with, well, you don't only watch films that make you laugh or that make you happy. You want to experience other emotions beyond just being happy all the time. So there's a very sort of basic, obvious reason as to why you might try and tackle or experience something like this, because you just want to try and understand something from a different point of view. And so I went into this game with a certain amount of trepidation, because I didn't know how I was going to feel about it, or how it was going to make me feel. I remember in the What Remains of Edith Finch game, which we did some playthroughs of on YouTube, actually. There's
we've got
an
interview with
we have with Giant Sparrow, Ian,
way back in our archive.
Yeah, it is somewhere in there. There's a segment in that you play through a child in a bath. I won't say much more than that, but it's for me, it was very powerful, and I was kind of dreading that bit of the game that I knew existed. So I came to That Dragon Cancer, started playing it, and I would say that whilst I've played a lot of games, I've played enough games and written professionally about enough games and consulted on enough games to be very kind of, I guess, well versed or qualified enough to be able to talk about the game and the mechanics of the game. The thing that I would consider myself to be not qualified or even necessarily justified in assessing is this family's interpretation of their experience that they've put out to be experienced as a game, because I've got no understanding of that, or no experience of that. I understand it, but I've not had any real first-hand experience of that, and so it seemed odd even playing it as a game. It seemed odd that it has a Metacritic score. It seemed, I understand why it does, but it's like, this isn't, I'm not here to say, is this a good game? Did I enjoy it? Did I have fun? I'm just here to experience this thing that's been put out in the same way that you might experience a song or a book or, a deeply personal documentary or whatever it might be. And to that end, I'm really pleased that I have experienced it. It didn't do what I worried it was going to do, which was like leave me in bits. And I think that's, for me, my assessment of that or interpretation of that is because it's a very personal interpretation of their experience. And so there's stuff in there that I understand intellectually, but I don't necessarily sort of connect to. But yeah, I'm glad something like that exists. Yeah. And it's, the whole artistic kind of expression thing. I'm glad that somebody wanted to use video games as their form of expression. They could have, and perhaps they also did, but they could have written a book or they could have written a song, whatever it might be, but they chose video games to express that. And I'm pleased that it exists. Of course, the reason it exists is a sad reason that it exists, but I'm glad that they chose that way to express that. So
yeah, well, they have a unique, the form of it enables you to be able to do unique things. So again, to go back to that friend, so when I was sort of explaining that there are a lot more sort of serious games and sort of thoughtful games out there beyond Fortnite and whatever, I sort of, in order to sort of help ground him in understanding it, I sort of explained it in that there's a value to having these sort of things in a game or in an interactive experience, because if you compare it to other forms, then I always think that books are about seeing into a person's mind. Films are about watching people do things, the actions that they do, and then games are being the person, being the character. That Dragon Cancer is a little bit different because you're not quite the character, but you are still, like, you are still performing actions within these worlds or these thoughts, often in that Dragon Cancer, these memories, or interpretations of these memories. So it does put you, because you're being in there, in this space, it does put you in a different zone, or it does sort of like open you up to interpreting in a different way than if you were in someone else's head, or if you were watching actions played out on screen. So it's not that I wouldn't say it's better than writing a book about it, or a song about it, or watching a movie, a documentary about it, whatever. But it is a different form of emotional consumption and reaction. Yeah. It does put you into psychologically, it does put you into a different space by having to be active within this thing that's being presented.
And when things use the form that they are to very good effect, so as a brief example of that, there's a moment where there's a dream sequence, effectively, and you are... the son, Joel, is he's holding on to these balloons, helium balloons, effectively, which are made of the hospital, surgical gloves blown up, and he's holding on to a bunch of these, and he's floating, and you're navigating him through what is effectively a maze of cancerous tumours that are all spiky, and so if you run into them, they can pop the balloons. And at times the camera is obscured, at times it feels clunky because the direction that you're pushing doesn't necessarily directly match up to what's on screen, and inevitably all of the balloons will pop, and then he starts to fall, and as his dad you wake up, and that's where the point you wake up. The form there is matched entirely to the content, that yes, it's awkward to navigate this, yes, it's difficult, yes, it's frustrating, yes, it's and inevitable that you're going to fail.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing. It's inevitable. You can't quote unquote win that.
No, and it directly ties into what the game is about, and it's like there is no other ending to this story. And so that's I found it to be powerful, but almost quite unsentimental, I think. And I hadn't really thought about that until now. It does expose the challenges that this couple went through as a married couple, that they had different points of view at times. And it shows that. It doesn't shy away from that and just show it all to be, oh, we loved our son dearly, here's a thing to commemorate his life. It shows the challenges that they faced with each other and within their relationship. And I think that's it didn't have to do that. I think that's a very brave thing to do. So yeah, did I enjoy it? I mean, I'm pleased to have had the experience. I would say to people, I mean, it's not even 2 hours long. So I would say to people, play it to see what it's like. And the notion of like value for money and that kind of thing, I part of the reason I bought that was to support the cause that the game was produced for. So the notion of like, oh, it's only 100 minutes long is really neither here nor there to me. But yeah, it's a thing that I think people should experience, and there are many games like it. I mean, John, you mentioned recently that Heal Hitler game that you've been playing.
I wouldn't say it's quite like that, but
no, for sure. But it's just a different, it's a very different thing. That's definitely one of those. If you explain that to somebody, they would say, "I didn't know games like that existed," and that's awesome. It's good to have games like that. So to go from.
And it's also good to have games like Call of Duty that come out every single year.
Everybody should support Call of Duty, because I'm worried that they don't get enough players. But yeah, to go from a game that is very much like that Dragon Cancer to something that is Call of Duty, that they are opposite ends of the scale in many different ways that I'm not going to get into, because I'm sure I'll dig holes for myself. Let's suffice to say they're different experiences. You've been playing the Call of Duty Alpha, is that right? Alpha since Friday.
since
what's been
Saturday. I think it came out on Saturday.
What's been the thing that you've kind of either most
Friday.
enjoyed or been most surprised by or been most pleased about? Like, what's going on in Call of Duty this year?
Well, I mean, you only get a tiny sliver of it, so you can only play one of the multiplayer game modes. So I don't know what's going on with it this year, just from this alpha that says you only get this tiny sliver. So yeah, the game mode is called Champion Hill. So there are 8 teams of 2 in this single space, but you only fight other teams of 2, like 1-on-1. So
Right. Yeah.
At the start of the game, you're just randomly assigned a match against another team of 2, and the matches are very short. And in that time, each team collectively starts with 12 lives, and within each game, within each 2 versus 2 skirmish, you might kill the other team 3 times. They might kill 4 times. Right. So then you leave that with 8 kills and 9 kills left, respectively.
And is that time limited, or is that like objective limited? Are you trying to do a thing, or is it just
no?
It's
just a straight up death match for a couple minutes. I can't remember how long each round is. They're very short. And then, you leave with 4 kills and the other team's got 3 kills. So then you've got that many lives left. So then when you go to your next round, you might have died 3 times in your first round. So you've got 9 kills left, 9 lives left. But the other team might have died 6 times. So they've only got 6 lives left. And then once you're down to 0, you're gone. So that team is eliminated from the competition. So it's good. Like, so when you... like towards the later rounds, if you've got like 2 kills left, the other team lives left, and the other team's got 2 lives less, and it's really tense. And the style of play tends to change as the game goes on. Like at the start, people are just flying out there, whatever, we've got 12 lives left, let's go. And then like once you've got 2 or 3 lives left, it really slows down a lot. And people are playing much more cautiously, especially if like you've got like 2 lives left and the other team have got like 8 lives left because they've done really well, and it's like, oh god, they can really afford to take risks. We can't, so we probably have to just sit back and camp, especially, or try and snipe them.
So are you just trying to effectively survive in that scenario, just to make it through
to the
each
final,
round,
basically, through to when there's just 2 teams left. And I mean, it does have its problem. I like the game mode because it's pretty original, and it does have like a pacing that sort of changes as you go, and it's tense. You're constantly going up against different players, so you're kind of experiencing different tactics and bits as you go. It's not perfect though, because as you go on in the game, so between every few rounds, you can go to, so you earn money as you play for doing kills and performing kills and whatever, winning rounds. And then every now and then you can go back to a central hub and just buy weapons to upgrade your stuff. And that actually ends up being a bit of a problem, because at the end, people can be so powerful, or they've got such powerful gear, that they're just randomly chucking grenades around, or like napalm, like incendiary rounds, and it's just like it can become a bit farcical. And what was really tense gunfights at the start, just using straight up weapons, become just this mad, just explosions going on, and bombs being, and fire everywhere, and it just all become a bit silly.
Yeah. Sounds a bit sort of more like win more. I can imagine kind of one team scraping through. Obviously, to get to the final, you need to have eliminated. Well, I suppose that's my question. Do you need to have eliminated other teams, or do other teams just need to have been eliminated? They need to fall off the bottom of the ladder, effectively.
Well, I mean, that's another thing. You can kind of just play very passively from the start and just work to stay alive and not lose lives, rather than kill, and just hide for the game, which is easier said than done.
Up.
It's easier said than done, because the way the minimap works and stuff, you can't just hide all the time. But you can just try to keep moving and avoid people, and it can become a bit silly. So yes, you could, towards the ends, you could have a team that's still got all of their lives, but have only done 2 kills or whatever.
Yeah, so if hardly got any gear, versus a team that's got very few lives but have won loads and have got loads of gear.
So it can be a bit silly. So I mean, but it's an alpha. There's balancing to be worked into this
absolutely.
game mode, and like spawn killing is a pretty bad issue, or it was in the alpha. I mean, the alpha's finished now, but spawning locations is something that Call of Duty struggled with quite a bit. It's a lot better than it used to be. I remember like the old Modern Warfare days back on 360. They just didn't fix the spawns for ages. Like, it was just crazy, and I was taking advantage of it like other people were. It was just silly. They've gotten better at it, but it takes like 4 or 5 weeks after release for that stuff to be kind of worked out properly, and there's still going to be players that are annoyed at it. Like, for some players, a single spawn kit was too much, but that's never really going to be solved fully.
But this was by it being an alpha, that is inherent to, or implicit to the very fact that you're playing an alpha. Like, that's partly what it's there for, right? To iron out, or to help assist generate a huge amount of data to then be analysed and say, this stuff needs to be rebalanced and changed. So
I think one of the things I like about it the most is, and it's probably going to make it even less attractive to you, is that movement is really fast, and you really like pop in and out of like crouch and moving through, like turning and strafe speed and everything. Like, it really if you're an aggressive player and you like to use, I haven't played it enough to know for sure, but I would imagine that if you're an aggressive player and you like to use a shotgun or some sort of submachine gun, close range weapons, then you could, I think you could probably do really well on this game, so long as they keep the movement speed and stuff.
Right. What I hear when you say that is, so it's one of those games where I can be killed 10 times without really even knowing where any of it's coming from. That's what I'm hearing. Because my reading of it is, I'm dead again. Oh, right, I guess I got shot. And then I turn around that way and I get shot in the back. It's that kind of thing. Yeah. But hey. We should team up. We should do a video. We should do a stream of you and me playing. Oh, dear.
Yeah. I mean, it hasn't made me wildly excited for the whole game as a whole. I mean, I'm as excited about it as I am for any Call of Duty, which is, kind of, I'll play it for sure, but I'm not like kind of counting down the days. I'm much more interested about Battlefield because, it hasn't been a Battlefield for a while, so that's a big part of that. But
Back 4 Blood, I'm not a first-person shooter really player at all, but Back 4 Blood as a team-based thing that harks on like Left 4 Dead and stuff. That's what I'm interested in doing. I'm sure we'll play that and talk about it at some point in the future. But I'll leave Call of Duty and Battlefield. To you.
It's good. The Champion Hill mode is good. There's a lot of hate for Champion Hill online, which I kind of get. I think people are just more angry about the same things I've mentioned, but I can give it a bit more slack because it is a new mode, and I'm curious about it.
So 4 very different experiences, I think it's fair to say. Baldur's Gate 3, Call of Duty, Vanguard. 2021.
Call of Duty Vanguard.
Vanguard, Operation Tango, and That Dragon Cancer. And as we mentioned, we've played a lot of other games in August. Of course, many of these games did not come out in August at all, but this will be something we do each month where we just look at what we've been playing, irrespective of whether it came out that month or not. As we mentioned at the top, there's Humankind and Psychonauts 2 that did come out in August. We've played both of those quite extensively. We've got episodes up for both of those games. But it'd be interesting to hear. I'd be interested to hear what other people have been playing in August, and maybe we'll get a little discussion going on kind of throwback games and very current games. And until next week, I guess we'll sign off and see everybody this time next week.